Hello everyone, today, this video will discuss the issue of Indigenous homelessness in Australia, analysing the root causes and presenting some actionable steps. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It is essential to recognise the ongoing effects of colonisation, as this has a profound connection to the issue of Indigenous homelessness. I may discuss content related to First Nations peoples and their cultures. I hold deep respect for Indigenous cultures, and if any content is inappropriate or insensitive, please let me know so I can address it. Thank you. This is the content of my presentation, covering various sections in sequence from the introduction to causes analysis, past intervention evaluation, and recommendations. Firstly, introduction. Recently, many Australian medias announced that an Indigenous homelessness centre will soon open in Melbourne's CBD. According to Ward 2024, Form Canberra Times, about 100,000 people getting help from homelessness service in Victoria, and 15% of them identify as Aboriginal. The news makes me wonder why there are so many Indigenous people. Are there some special reasons leading to that? This development highlights a larger issue. Despite government spending and numerous programs, Indigenous Australians continue to be disproportionately affected by homelessness. Today, we will explore the underlying causes, from historical displacement to economic marginalisation, and evaluate the systemic barriers that perpetuate this issue. Let's start by understanding the broader context. Factors such as colonisation and intergenerational trauma have led to severe socio-economic disadvantages. Let me show you some data. Despite only making up 3.3% of the population, Indigenous Australians account for 20% of the homeless. Indigenous people are 14 times likely to be homeless compared to non-Indigenous. This disparity calls for a system-level analysis. Indigenous homelessness is not caused by a single factor but is an outcome of interrelated influences like historical policies, socio-economic challenges, and cultural disconnection. Using system analysis, we can map out how these factors interact. For example, systemic racism, rooted in colonial policies like the stolen generations, directly impacts the accessibility of social services today. This lack of trust in government agencies worsens the situation. Here's a visual representation of these interconnections. Imagine a system where historical policies influence current-day services and cultural disconnection feeds into economic instability. For example, systemic racism leads to mistrust in services, which then feeds into lower service utilization rates, creating a cycle. The map shows how different factors are interdependent and create feedback loops that perpetuate homelessness. To break it down, we can categorize the influences into three levels. Upstream, historical factors like colonization and systemic racism create socio-economic disadvantages. Midstream, lack of culturally competent services causes distrust, leading to under-utilization of available help. Downstream, personal circumstances, such as substance abuse and family violence, are exacerbated by economic deprivation and cultural dislocation. To address Indigenous homelessness, we must consider both internal and external competition. Internally, individuals face challenges such as trauma, shame, and mistrust, often stemming from the stolen generations and intergenerational trauma. These feelings, combined with mental health and substance abuse issues, make seeking help difficult. Externally, systemic barriers include discriminatory housing markets, the stigmatization of homelessness, and the lack of culturally competent services and policies. These factors reinforce each other, creating a cycle of homelessness that cannot be broken without addressing both the internal and external pressures Indigenous Australians face. Then, to understand the theory behind Indigenous homelessness, we apply the social ecological model, which explains how various levels relate to the issue. At the individual level, mental health issues and substance abuse directly impact a person's stability. The interpersonal level encompasses family violence and community breakdown, further isolating individuals. At the community level, the loss of cultural identity plays a critical role in disconnection. Institutional barriers, such as inaccessible services, limit support options, while structural issues, like systemic racism and discriminatory policies, create the overarching challenges that sustain homelessness. Together, these layers reveal the complexity of addressing Indigenous homelessness and highlight the need for multi-level solutions. Governments and relevant organisations have been working hard to support Indigenous people. Past programs, such as Aboriginal Housing Victoria, have made progress in providing culturally appropriate housing. However, many programs lack sufficient funding and fail to fully engage Indigenous communities in decision-making, limiting their effectiveness. If we take a closer look at the issue, we can identify several reasons for this. Many programs simply don't get enough funding and are too limited in their scope. They also miss the mark by not involving Indigenous communities enough in the decision-making process. Additionally, these programs often fail to address the deeper, systemic causes of Indigenous homelessness, such as systemic racism and cultural disconnection, further reducing their overall impact. To create lasting solutions to Indigenous homelessness, interventions must operate at multiple levels, following the social ecological model, SEM. Upstream, structural level advocate for policy reforms to address systemic racism and historical inequities that continue to marginalize Indigenous communities. For example, reform the policies to ensure Indigenous people have access to affordable housing options and not subject to discrimination when applying. Midstream, community and institutional level strengthen community-based services by improving cultural competency and involving Indigenous leaders in the decision-making process. Community-led initiatives are more likely to build trust and effectively meet the unique needs of Indigenous individuals. Like improving cultural competency training for service providers can enhance trust. Pawson et al., 2018. Downstream, individual and interpersonal level address personal and family challenges such as mental health, substance abuse, and family violence, but through culturally sensitive approaches. Indigenous-led counseling services and family support programs can make a critical difference at this level. Natsaha, 2018. In summary, addressing Indigenous homelessness requires a holistic, culturally sensitive approach that integrates systemic, community, and individual-level interventions. Only by prioritizing cultural diversity, social justice, and Indigenous leadership can we achieve sustainable outcomes. Thanks for watching.